Laura, I'm going to start with you. So what more do we know about these efforts from the Trump administration to, they say, protect migrant children? Well, it appears they're separating them in the background as well.
Yeah, today, Antonia, the Justice Department, along with the Homeland Security Department, announced this new joint task force called Alpha that they say is going to be a collaboration between the two agencies designed to identify and detain people who are sponsors of undocumented migrant children that have no familial relationship with those children. Now, some of what they announced today, the administration had already been doing as of last year, like requiring DNA testing. But Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, as well as DHS Secretary Mullen, repeated some claims that they have going back to 2024, with Blanche saying that this was ultimately about protecting these children from human trafficking, and Mullen saying that these are missing children that they are trying to find. Take a listen.
All of us are going after those who illegally brought children to this country. And again, these are dangerous and lonely paths from wherever they're coming into the United States, and many of them have had heinous crimes committed against them.
To allow 450,000 kids to go missing throughout this country. President Trump has made it a point to go find these kids. We found 146,000 kids so far. 146,000 kids. We still have nearly 300,000 missing.
So that claim of hundreds of thousands of missing kids is something that Trump and his allies, including Vice President J.D. Vance, made during the 2024 campaign trail. And it's essentially them misrepresenting an Inspector General report at the time by DHS that found that between 2019 and 2023, these unaccompanied children, there are approximately 32,000 of them that did not appear for scheduled immigration hearings, some 291,000 of them that had not received a notice to appear in court. So when you add it up, you reach that number. But missing paperwork and ICE not necessarily keeping track of these children, many of whom are residing with parents or with family members, missing paperwork doesn't equal missing children, Antonia. And the other big claim here is that they are saying that they are trying to protect children from human trafficking. But again, they have sought to deport many of these unaccompanied children quickly, and in that process have repeated some of what they did during the first term, which is putting them potentially in dangerous situations when they deport them to these third countries with potentially no family there to receive them, Antonia.
Yeah, Paula, I want to dig into some of the inconsistencies and ironies in some of what Laura has spelled out there. Look, you and I have covered unaccompanied minor children and the immigration system under multiple administrations for a long time. I think we both agree that if the government wants to help find and support and offer more resources to children, people across the aisle would support, and because these kids have been through so much, right, these minors. At the same time, it's sort of hard to watch them set up and describe themselves as the defenders, the finders, the supporters of these unaccompanied minors after what everyone just saw happen to Liam Conejo Ramos. Yeah. After the fact that we've seen, I have interviewed the kids who have been left alone as their parents have been deported to raise themselves in apartments that they don't know how they're going to pay the rent for now. You know, it's hard to make sense of those things at the same time.
Of course. I mean, the irony is exactly that. No? They're casting themselves as these protectors when, in fact, those are the very same children that perhaps were already separated by them. And they are capable and willing to detain those same children that they claim to want to protect. But the thing is, there's nothing they can do that would ever allow this country or any of us sitting here to forget what happened in 2018 when many of us and you were covering child separation. Now, the way that those children were crying when they were being separated. And I spent so much time at the border during those years, during zero tolerance policy when they did that, in towns like Matamoros and Reynosa, right by the Rio Grande Valley. And they were being pushed to answer a question that is now repeating itself in the interior of the United States, which is almost an impossible scenario, which is, do I fathom to cross the border and risk crossing the border into the United States and perhaps have my children separated from me? Or, to your point, do I stay on the Mexican side of the border and risk living at the hands of the cartels? And so that same question, which is prompted by Tom Homan's cruelty, by the understanding that you can weaponize cruelty and that cruelty can be used as a deterrent, That is playing out, like you've said many times, throughout the interior of this country, pushing families like Liam Conejo Ramos to ponder that same question. Do I risk going to a homeland that perhaps can be a death sentence, or do I stay in the United States and perhaps be separated from my child? And that is, there's no way that we can't see that cruelty play out.
Jaleesa, why do you think they're coming out with this message and I guess trying to take some control of a narrative that, despite the strengths that they had on the immigration front through the election, they have, in many people's view, lost control of over the course of the last year and a half?
That's right. I really think it's on the backdrop of the World Cup that we're facing with. The World Cup is starting this week, and what we're seeing is that this administration has failed at every effort to really rein in what's happening at the border. We are now facing an issue where didn't think we would be here again, to your point of separating children and their families. Immigration has been top of mind ever since last election. And this Trump administration has failed at every attempt. It's an honor to host the World Cup, right? And we have welcomed so many people into our country to experience what this country can bring and can offer. But yet, our citizens and immigrants communities in these host cities are terrified to leave their homes, right? They're terrified they're going to be arrested by ICE agents. We have referees from different countries being turned away at airports. We have FIFA distancing themselves from our immigration policy. And today, in the UN, they hosted a press conference basically talking about our failure and our human rights records here in this country. That is an embarrassment to this country. And luckily, we are seeing Democrats being the only ones that's pointing to that. But we're on the world stage and the world is watching, and they're disappointed. Yeah.
David, I want your thoughts on the World Cup and what this all is going to represent. Because on the one hand, there have been these efforts to say, the administration is not planning to go after fans. But after months of people across the world seeing stories about tourists being questioned when they land at certain airports or even brought into immigration detention after thinking they had the right visa to visit and travel throughout the United States, I have to imagine that there is some fear. They're having a hard time, at least in some corners of the world, probably taking this administration's words at face value.
The World Cup in LA.
Yeah, Antonia, just to give you a sense of where those concerns are coming from. So I'm in the Coliseum in LA, which is where there is what they're calling a fan festival, where people who can't afford $1,000 to actually go see a game can come watch the games on big screens, et cetera. And I don't know if you can see this behind me, but basically everyone here is a Mexico fan. They're all wearing Mexico jerseys because Mexico's playing the opening match today in Mexico City, which is what you would expect from LA. And it also helps you understand why people in this city specifically would be so worried about the idea of having ICE around here, targeting, indiscriminately targeting people in the way that they have been. Now, I would be really surprised if we actually did see the kind of spectacular immigration enforcement actions that we saw under Kristi Noem, which were designed to get headlines and did in fact get headlines. It's just that those headlines didn't go the way that they wanted them to. That was the whole reason for replacing Noem with Mullen, for getting rid of Greg Bovino, installing people like David Venturella, was to quiet that down. But that doesn't mean that ICE isn't here. ICE is still in LA, and people are very aware of that. And it's not just that, right? Look, World Cups are occasions for the host countries to present themselves to the world, right? Typically, they do so by presenting themselves as welcoming, diverse, open to the world. The U.S. is in a moment where it's very belligerently presenting itself as the exact opposite, right? You just heard of the case where a Somali referee who had, prepared for years to fulfill his dream of refereeing the World Cup was turned away at the Miami airport after being held in a CBP interrogation room for 11 hours overnight. We've gotten no clear explanation for why that happened. The referee has said that it was wrongful, that he had all the proper paperwork, that he has no connections to any kind of criminal or other organization that would have justified that. There's the question of the Iran team, Antonia. Of course, the U.S. started a war with Iran, and now the Iran team, which is participating in the war, they can't enter the U.S. until the day that they play. So they're currently in Tijuana, waiting to cross the border on Monday, which is the day that they're playing here in L.A. That's very unusual. Usually teams arrive at the location where they're playing days before a match. So there are all of these ways in which we're seeing the United States very closed off, aggressive, belligerent, imperialist posture before the world play out in this cup, even if it doesn't mean the same kinds of, indiscriminate ICE raids that we saw here in LA pretty much exactly a year ago, Antonia.
Yeah, David, I mean, on your point about the Iran team, it's not just unusual. We're not doing that to other people. It's also, when you think of what athletes are going through, unfair. I mean, they're going to have to travel when other athletes are going to have the time to rest up, to hydrate, and make sure that they're ready for their game. Paula, I want you to help me spell out the bigger picture here once again, too, because we have what's happening with the World Cup, the fears that Jaleesa and David have just described here. But then we also have this sort of policy machinery that's always happening in the background with this administration, too. The Washington Post has reviewed a memo sent to ICE employees in which the acting director said the agency is eliminating a requirement to report deaths that occur within 30 days of people being released from their custody. Mm-hmm. So in other words, they don't have to tell the public, or they're not going to try to tell the public anymore, if someone dies shortly after just getting out of ICE custody. What would be the logic for that?
So piecing it all together, what's the logic? The logic is that they have reached the level of the capacity to dehumanize people to the point that they literally don't care. And I think sometimes we try and intellectualize their reasoning. And the truth is they don't care. Under this administration, 50 migrants have died. But to go back to the World Cup, I think that's the image that scares me. You know, that while people are having fun out there, as people should, and watching these games and enjoying the World Cup, right around the United States, within and around our borders, there is a deep, deep crisis within our detention centers and within our border. And that image scares me, that some of these fans that will be able to go in and out, while I think DHS will try its best to project, like we've talked, an image of strength, an image that projects a certain type of national identity, but not chaos. While there's always this kind of ominous warning around us where we don't really know what they're going to do, but nothing really happens, to normalize that, to have fans that then leave our country, go back to their homelands and say, you know what, it wasn't that bad after all, nothing happened. That to me is very dangerous.